India's international influence is growing, and it's now at a geopolitical crossroads.
India right now is in a geopolitical sweet spot. It is being courted by countries all over the world.
The question isn't whether India will rise as a great power. It will, based on the current statistics. But the question is when.
With a GDP of more than $3 trillion, India is the world's largest democracy and has the fifth largest economy in the world, behind Germany, Japan, China, and the United States. Notably, the country has a growing influence in the global south, which is mainly made up of countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, says Karthik Nachiappan, who researches Indian foreign policy at the National University of Singapore.
That will increasingly clash against India's own growing partnership and relationship with the West, especially with the United States, with Europe, which require different things from India.
Ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, India has been mostly tight-lipped in condemning Russia over the act. Instead, India has boosted its imports of heavily discounted Russian oil since the war began. This has ruffled the feathers of Western powers such as the United States and the European Union.
During the Cold War, one of India's most steadfast partners was the Soviet Union. This was during a period when India did not have very close relations with the West, especially the United States. The Soviet Union gave political support for India, it gave material support, it gave different kinds of security support through Russian arms and ammunition. Almost 70% of Indian military's resources and arms are made by Russia.
Even though bilateral trade between Russia and India hit a record $45 billion, the US is by a long way New Delhi's biggest trading partner. That year, trade between the US and India exceeded $190 billion.
And yet India has not married its trading relationships with military alliances.
The US-India relationship is one for the future, whereas the India-Russia relationship economically is one of the past. And so what the United States has been trying to do is move even further forward into the future by expanding, deepening its economic and trading relationship with India to make it realize that siding with Russia over these kinds of issues and conflicts is not in its long-term interests.
As Russia's invasion of Ukraine drags on, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called for peace and cooperation.
This is not an era of war, but it is one of dialogue and diplomacy.
India is performing a delicate balancing act between protecting its own interests while maintaining ties with its trading partners. But as the world becomes more polarized, can India maintain its stance of non-alignment, or will it be forced to pick sides?
India's position of non-alignment dates back to its independence in 1947. Then, the world was drifting into two blocs, the Western Bloc led by the United States and its NATO allies, while the Eastern Bloc was led by the Soviet Union. Developing countries were under pressure to side with either of the two during that period of political and military tension, known as the Cold War. Refusing to get caught between two major powers, the non-aligned movement was first assembled in 1956, before India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, along with leaders of Yugoslavia, Egypt, Ghana, and Indonesia, had their first official summit in 1961. Its aim was to give a voice of autonomy for developing countries in international affairs.
Non-alignment has been a primary strategy that has governed Indian foreign policy through the decades. It has given the Indian governments over the years a tool to not entangle itself into issues or affairs that would harm its national interests, primarily economic development. Upon decolonization, India was a very poor country. If they were going to focus wholly on development, then they had to be geopolitically distant from different kinds of hot issues that were breaking up.
How is it different from neutrality?
The difference between neutrality and non-alignment is neutrality is more relevant during times of war. It's when a country or a state categorically says that it will not support a particular war and it will remain indifferent. It's generally a legal concept and it's enshrined in international law. Non-alignment is not purely applicable during times of war. It's a foreign policy strategy that also extends during other kinds of crises, whether it's an economic crisis, whether it has something to do with sanctions, for example.
Don McLean-Gill, a geopolitical analyst at De La Salle University, says that India has an independent approach to its foreign policy.
It is beyond neutrality and looking into ways where India will be able to contribute responsibly and at the same time look after its own interests.
India is a member of numerous regional and multilateral institutions. The country is a member of security-centered blocs Shanghai Cooperation Organization alongside China and Russia, and the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue alongside the United States, which has long-standing contentious relations with both China and Russia. India is also a founding member of BRICS, a coalition made up of emerging economies that includes both Russia and China. At the recent 15th BRICS summit, the bloc has more than doubled its membership to include Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates in 2024.
China wants to turn BRICS into an anti-West alliance. It wants to derive more support from key members in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, against American interests worldwide. India does not want to see, or does not hope to see, the BRICS to be turned into an anti-West coalition. So by staying in and by supporting the expansion could work against that internally. It could work to ensure that the BRICS and the kinds of issues that it deals with over the next few years does not get too confrontational with the West.
How can we explain India's foreign policy decisions to be a member of all these different bodies that are not necessarily aligned with each other?
Over the last 10, 20 years is that non-alignment has incrementally transformed into a policy of multi-alignment, where India is open to different kinds of groupings, coalitions, alliances, arrangements, bilateral partnerships with countries that it did not have good relations with, as long as it advances the national interest, which is economic transformation.
India plays an influential role in international financial bodies such as the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the Asian Development Bank. Over the last decade, India has had limited involvement in free trade deals, including pulling out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, considered to be the world's largest trade agreement. However, in the last few years, the country has ramped up its free trade agreements with countries including Japan, South Korea, and the United Arab Emirates. It also has FTAs within its geographic neighborhood, such as with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and directly with countries such as Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia.
We are looking into India's participation in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is also seen as a multilateral game changer, as they'd like to say, to be able to sort of redirect supply chains away from China to hopefully lessen the dependence of developing countries towards China.
Even as Modi seeks to transform India's economy, the country has a long tradition of protectionism. Most recently, it banned food exports like rice, wheat, and sugar. While the move was to cool domestic prices, it exacerbated a global food crisis smarting from the war in Ukraine.
India has to always balance between the strategic considerations, which are compelling it to be more open economically, security-wise, with the political economy constraints, the different kinds of industries and firms within India that do not want to compete with other foreign firms.
India is not against such arrangements, but it has to be equitable to the point that it also reflects India's concerns, given, of course, that it is responsible for 1.4 billion people.
It's not going to be neat or pretty, and there's going to be a lot of zigzagging back and forth between protectionism and openness. But I think the broader trend is toward more free trade over time.
Besides prioritizing trade, another factor that influences India's foreign policy is its neighbor up north, China.
While bilateral trade crossed $100 billion in 2022, India's relationship with China has worsened over the last decade due to border disputes.
India has a massive security problem on both its eastern and western border with China, and it is looking for ways to balance what it sees as a very powerful Chinese threat. And one way it's doing that is by working closely with other partners who also have their own Chinese strategic problem, like the United States, like the European Union, like a few countries in Southeast Asia.
India presents itself as an alternative buffer, a strategic buffer that Southeast Asian states can rely on without worrying that they would have to choose sides.
Southeast Asian countries want more of India, but they don't want so much so as to offend China. So that balance is an important one to maintain.
But will India's growing economic clout mean that it will remain non-aligned in the years to come?
more growth over time will also mean that India will be able to convert some of its prosperity into military influence. So to deal with the different kinds of security threats that it's facing now.
India has witnessed several challenges that are quite relatable to the challenges of other developing countries. And the fact that India has been able to slowly surpass them in a sustainable way is something that is seen as a positive benchmark for countries to sort of emulate in the long run.